Yeah, thanks, Daryl. Appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. How are we doing on volume? Can y'all hear in the back? Good? Okay, good. Got a thumbs up. Well, good morning. Yeah, it's good to see y'all. I got the opportunity to speak to this group, I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago when you all were in Cincinnati, and it was a good group then. I only think I aggravated just a few of you. I'll probably aggravate maybe a few of you again, maybe, but maybe not. So what I'm going to touch on here at the get-go is actually some of our research where we're looking at integrating herbicides and cover crops. And in Tennessee, and we got a couple folks in here from Tennessee, we're a no-till state, hey, Mont. And that's standard practice. I mean, that's what we do. But I've been there now 14 years, and very early on, it became very apparent to me we were not going to be long-term sustainable controlling weeds with just herbicides, and we needed to look at something else. And integrating cover crops, and some of the ideas I got from some of the folks in this room, like Maud over there, is one of the best ways we've found. And really, the last decade, we've done some pretty interesting research that's pointed that out. So I'm going to start with this. I don't think anybody... How many of y'all got glyphosate-resistant weeds? Oh, yeah. Who doesn't have glyphosate-resistant weeds? So this is just some in Tennessee. How many of y'all heard of glyphosate babies? Remember that term? The kids didn't know anything, just spray Roundup, and everything was easy. I've noticed a generational shift. My latest graduate student, he's kind of what I would term a resistance baby. He's never known Roundup to work. It's a grass herbicide to kill pigweed, to kill horseweed, to kill ragweed. He's had to use all he's ever known is something else other than Roundup, because Roundup's no longer been effective. And that really got me, because I'm getting old, right, Sarah? We're getting old, and these generational shifts, they kind of come along. So this is where we are in Tennessee. It really kind of hit the high tide of resistance was 2011. I'll never forget that date, June 21st, 2011. I got called to this field. I got called to a lot of fields. It was a soybean field. He sprayed Roundup on his soybeans, and it didn't work. I just got my new iPhone, well, just smartphone then, and I see boy, I got a lot of calls that day. I was in this field and got a lot of calls. I scrolled through I had 81 phone calls that day from growers in Tennessee, and most of them were fields like this. And that's when it really dawned on me what a wreck we had that year, and we've got to do something different. Not just relying on herbicides, but they are still going to be a key component of it. So Palmer Amaranth is our bane in Tennessee and a good part of the Mid-South and the Southeast. I know it's starting to creep up. I know it's got a pretty good toehold in southern Illinois, parts of Indiana, from what I've been told. Keep it out as best you can. This thing is about impossible to get your arms around once it gets established. It's got a long history of becoming resistant to a lot of the herbicides we've used for a long time. In Tennessee, we lost Treflan and Prowl on it back in the 80s. We lost the ALS inhibitors, Scepter, Pursuit, Classic in the 90s. Roundup we lost better than a decade ago now. Who can believe that? Atrazine in Georgia, and we're starting to see that in some places as well. Just lately, and it's been a big game changer for us, the PPO resistance. This is my next statement. It's not when, it's not if, it's when we're going to have resistance to what we're looking at now. Liberty, dicamba, 2,4-D, the new technologies. If all we do is do what we did with Roundup, we're going to lose them too in a pretty short order. If you think about it, think about Roundup. Roundup-ready soybeans came out in 96. The cotton came out in 98. The first documented resistance to Palmer pigweed was 2004 in Georgia. You got about 12 applications of a herbicide. If that's all you're doing is relying on that herbicide on enough acres before you start selecting for resistance. We've been using Liberty for a while. The clock's already ticking on it, right? Dicamba and 2,4-D, they're new to being used in crop, but they're not new. They've been 60 years, so the clock's ticking on these. We've got to manage them better than what we did Roundup to keep the shelf life longer until maybe we can bridge to something else in the future. So this is where we are in Tennessee. We've been propping up the Roundup Ready system primarily with FlexStar, right? And primarily we were going out, after Roundup no longer worked, we were spraying Roundup and we were tank mixing with FlexStar. And that worked really well until just the last couple of years in Tennessee. And now we're seeing messes again across the state with FlexStar or PPO resistance. So this is the primary counties right now that I'm aware of. There's probably some more, but it's basically most of West Tennessee, most of East Arkansas. Boot Hill, Missouri is where the PPO palmer resistant is. Down in the Mississippi, there's a few counties in southern Illinois, I think one or two in Indiana that's been documented PPO resistant. There's probably more. We can't find them all. But if FlexStar is no longer working on your farm, there's a good chance it's PPO resistant from a post-emergent standpoint. So is that all bad? Does it translate into these PPO herbicides we use pre-emergence, like Valor or Authority? And the answer kind of depends. So this past year in Tennessee, we found 3 now. There used to be 1 gene, but now we've been able to document 3 different genes that are resistant to the PPO herbicides. One of those genes in particular kind of gives kind of erodes the value you get out of a pre-emergence herbicide. This is where you see with these, I don't know how well those lines come up. So the blue line, what we have there is Valor on your all's left at a susceptible location where FlexStar still works on the pigweed. And on the right, we have a resistant location, kind of located in the Mississippi River bottom, actually on a field there on a farmer. So in the black line there is 21 days after application, what control. So with Valor at 2 ounces, 21 days after application, the susceptible location, we got 100% control. Even out 28 days, we still have 100% control. That's not the case at the resistant location. We're around 85 to 90% control 21 days. We're getting close, to about 70% control 28 days. So you're losing some time from a pre-emergent standpoint. Now, the thing is, it's not zero. It's still providing a lot of value. And right now, we got to go to any port in a storm. I still think we need to use these PPOs in a pre-standpoint. We just cannot rely on them alone. We've got to have something else in there with them. A lot of these premixes we're using, I think, fit the bill there. And just to prove that point, this is another one. So we got Authority, sulfentrazone, on y'all's left at the resistant location, and then Authority MTZ, so sulfentrazone and metribuzin on the right-hand side. And you see adding Syncor to it, you get much better control even at these resistant locations. And I've seen that with other things. Syngenta has a product called Broadax, same thing. You'll get much better control putting that dual in with Authority and having 2 different modes of action, because the PPOs still provide value on some of the pigweed, and they slow down the others. And you get the dual in there, or in this case, metribuzin, it helps pick up the slack. And the 2 together work really well. Here's one of the take-home things. I think a lot of folks are thinking that, I'm just going to spray and extend this year. I'm going to spray dicamba and call it a day, like I did with Roundup. Some places that's going to work, some places not so much. So at these sites where we had PPO-resistant pigweed and PPO-susceptible pigweed, we started screening other herbicides. Mostly because the farmer was telling me, I'm having trouble with a lot of these herbicides working at this resistant site. And so here we have PPO susceptibles in blue, the resistance in red, and this site we know for a fact is 60% of the pigweed at the resistant site is FlexStar PPO resistant. And you can see that one shot of XtendiMax, 22 ounces, we're getting just a shade over 80% control, not 100. And you're going to find that at some locations. And this was sprayed on time, 3-inch pigweed, just like the label said. Of course, fomecifen or FlexStar is terrible at the resistant location, still really good at the susceptible. But the one thing I wanted to point out here is XtendiMax followed by fomecifen. Look at that. Even though FlexStar didn't work by itself, a sequential application after that dicamba application did. And what I think is going on here is the resistance, that FlexStar resistance mechanism in the plants is damaged by the dicamba. And y'all have sprayed, how many of y'all been spraying dicamba this last year? Surely a lot of y'all. Yeah, and a lot more of you will be this next year. When you spray that on pigweed, the ones that don't die, it's not like they grow like a true pigweed. They don't grow that 3 inches a day. They're slower. They grow a ½ inch a day. They grow an inch a day. They're a lot slower. So you can finish off those cripples with an application of FlexStar. And from what we're seeing from a drift mitigation standpoint, if I can only have to spray dicamba once, and I come back with FlexStar, I'm going to do it. Because that later application of dicamba may be hard to get to stay on label. With the wind speeds now crunched down 3 to 10 mile an hour, neighboring crops, all kinds of things. So in cotton, application of Liberty followed by dicamba works very well. Of course, on the far right-hand side, you got 2 applications of dicamba. That works, but I still like using these different herbicides, mostly to help on resistance management, because 2 shots of dicamba is an express lane to resistance to dicamba. And 2, just we're spraying dicamba less and got less likely to drift on your neighbor. I did want to show you the picture of that location that we had, and I've had a couple of locations where we spray the recommended rate of dicamba on 3-inch pigweed. We sprayed that on the June 6th or 7th this past year, and I took that picture a week later. Now, Palmer amaranth, it grows 3 inches a day. So dicamba's affecting it, but it's still growing. So we've got to manage it. This is really kind of a shot across the bow. We've got to manage it with other herbicides as well as other things you don't pour out of a jug. The other herbicides that you know, the new Extend trait and the Enlist trait really aren't going to help us with is the glyphosate-resistant grass species we're starting to see. We got goosegrass in Tennessee. Roundup is no longer effective on. Liberty's never been all that good on it. Mayor's tail. Dicamba's going to help us a lot there. But at least in Tennessee, we've been relying on dicamba now for about 12, 13, 14 years. And we're starting to see a little bit of erosion in how effective it is on it. Farmers have been having to raise the rate to get the same level of control. Fortunately, you can do that now with Extend crops. But still, the direction of that is pointing to more tolerance. So again, we got to use other herbicides in the mix. This is one that just scares weed scientists to death, and particularly in my part of the world, is the Italian ryegrass. We're seeing more of it show up, particularly in cornfields, not being able to do a lot with it. If you don't kill it before the corn's up, I can't give you anything that's going to get it other than reaching down and pulling it up. This thing we're trying to be very cognizant of going forward. Most notably because in Mississippi, just a couple months ago, they not only identified Italian ryegrass that's resistant to Roundup, it's resistant to clethodim or Select. We got no post option on it. So I'm really very cautious about Italian ryegrass and trying to keep it in check, particularly when I'm using cover crops. Planting green. Maud, I don't know, did you take this picture? Maybe. I think, yeah. I get more calls on this. Well, we're planting green. And from a weed control standpoint, I love it. It can really help the shelf life of your weed control. There's some drawbacks to it. That green bridge for insects can be a big issue, where you're going to have to look at maybe using an insecticide. But the other thing I do worry about when we're planting green is maybe Italian ryegrass kind of being a nurse crop in there and hiding in there. We just don't want to get that thing started. So we're increasingly using cover crops in Tennessee. It's becoming more and more the norm. What I've found, and this isn't anything new, a lot of farmers have found it too, cover crops alone aren't going to provide the weed control we need year in, year out. Herbicides aren't either. But the two together, I think, married together can. Don't forget the winter annual weeds. What we found in Tennessee is if you can get a good stand of a cover crop, you don't have to really worry about mare's tail. It's very light dependent to germinate. That's one big fight there you don't even have to worry about. It can also help reduce what Italian ryegrass might come up. But again, you do want to start clean. One thing we've really found with the new technologies coming online, the Extend, Enlist, even the Liberty Link, and there's some ones coming on down the line. Syngenta's going to have one here that's going to give tolerance to HPPD and some other things. They really work well making a cover crop a better weed management tool. And why they do that is basically you can manage the cover crop easier and delay cover crop termination until closer to planting, which can help us on weed control. One thing, again, I was worried about Italian ryegrass, and so I had a graduate student where we went out on cereal rye, because we're using a lot of cereal rye in Tennessee, and spraying herbicides on it just to take out any Italian ryegrass. This is spraying our cover crop in the fall just to keep the Italian ryegrass from getting started. We got a bunch of different things there. Dual and Zidua were the best. So a weed control in the cover crop, and I think a lot of y'all could tell me better than I could tell you, but you want as uniform as possible. Biomass is the key, at least from my standpoint, from a weed management standpoint. The more is the better. You want a crop that's easy to terminate. Sometimes that's a problem, but that's what you want. The species, I've been doing this over a decade now, and I had a lot of trial and error, and I would emphasize error. But I basically dialed in on a grass, either cereal rye or wheat, and a legume, vetch or crimson clover. You can use some others, but I like that blend. I get just better tonnage out of that, and just better weed control with a legume grass blend than I do with any one of them by themselves, particularly in soybean. So looking at cover crop biomass, so what we have here is alone cereal rye, and then it's a blend. With the orange bar would be crimson clover, and the green would be hairy vetch. And that gives me the most tonnage. And what you see with that cereal rye, it'll grow depending on the winter. We're having a pretty good winter this year, so it probably is not going to grow as tall. But that vetch will climb all up in the wheat, and it really gives you more tonnage and can help you out there. A lot of times I'll recommend wheat. And the reason I do that is it's not as good from weed control standpoint as rye, but everybody's got a little wheat in the bin. It's cheap. So it makes a difference just how access you can get to it. Horseweed, I mentioned it. It's not really a problem in a good cover crop. And this is just some data to point this out. Matthew Wiggins did this a few years ago where we were looking at plants of horseweed or mare's tail with a cover and without a cover. And you can see it makes a big, big difference having that cover crop out there. This is the kind of biomass I want. So this is vetch and wheat. But this is what I want to try and control our palmer amaranth to help. So that's what we're looking at. And so what we did is we burned down with Roundup and dicamba and Extend beans 2 weeks before planting, a week before planting, the day we planted, and a week and 2 weeks after planting is when we sprayed it. And there's a picture of where we planted it green, and we sprayed Roundup and dicamba 2 weeks after planting. And from a weed control standpoint, it really looked good. So here's the data on it. So again, the planting date was May 5th. To y'all's left, April 20th is when we were looked at just vetch compared to vetch and wheat together. So 2 weeks before planting, April 20th. A week before planting, April 27th. The day we planted, we terminate with Roundup and dicamba. May 12th, week after, and then 2 weeks after. And what we're measuring here is the days that palmer pigweed came up and got to 4 inches tall to when you need to do something with it. And the longer you can delay it, the better off you are of trying to control it at that 4 inches. So it buys you more time. The other thing that isn't on here is it cuts the number of palmer amaranth you have to fool with, try to control with a herbicide by 50%. So half your battle's over with the cover crop, and you're just trying to take out the other half, and it delays them coming up. So it's really a win-win position with these cover crops. This is just looking at yield. Really didn't have any impact on yield. It was all pretty doggone good. It was up around 60 bushel, regardless of planting date or termination timing. Planting date was still May 5th. So the big question is, do I still use a pre in a cover crop? And the answer is yes. It helps. Invariably, we've got holes out there we need to fill in. What we're starting to see, though, is not all these pre's are created equal in a cover crop. I am not a fan of Warrant. It is the most consistent, inconsistent herbicide I've ever been around. You just spray it no-till ground. If you don't get a rain, and it's not going to get activated. It needs quite a bit of rain to get activated. But for whatever reason, I'm getting very good, and I think it's the encapsulation, I'm getting very good residual control out of it in a cover crop. And it's been consistent. I've never seen that when I use it anywhere else, but I do see it work well in a cover crop. What about grasses? Now, there's a difference. I'm talking about palmer pigweed. Some of these grass weeds, morning glory, they're not all that impressed with cover crops. I still have a problem with them in cover crops. So that's where some of these other herbicides, I had good luck with dual. Prefix was very good. Zidua, some of these other grass herbicides. But for pigweed, the last several years, Warrant's worked very well. And here's goosegrass, same deal. These grasses aren't as impressed with the mulch as Palmer pigweed is. Palmer pigweeds, there's been a number of things that's shown on Palmer, actually water hemp, Palmer pigweed, any of the pigweeds, they need 3 things to germinate. And 2 of them you think of right off. They need heat and they need water, but they actually need a flash of light. So you can keep them shaded, you'll keep them from germinating. Here's some pictures. Let's see what's going on there. So here we got XtendiMax at 22 ounces, Roundup PowerMax at 1 quart, tank mixed with Zidua. 1 application where we sprayed it at planting. The TT is termination timing, so that's at planting. There's Zidua, tank mixed with that, Warrant, and then dual Magnum. So it's just 1 application, 83 days later. I didn't spray anything else. To me, that's a win. Here's the 2 weeks after planting. So we sprayed XtendiMax at 22 ounces, Roundup PowerMax at 1 quart, Zidua, Warrant, and dual Magnum. And we sprayed that combination 2 weeks after the planter ran through the field. And that's all we sprayed. Very effective one shot. So this has been some of the more exciting stuff we've done in a while. This was my pick of the litter, is these premixes. I talked about them before. I'm going to talk about them again. They all worked. So XtendiMax, Roundup PowerMax, tank mix with Zidua and FlexStar, with Warrant Ultra, or with Prefix. They all work slick. I'd take that any day. A little more broader spectrum on other things. And the yields were good. No differences on any of the yields across any of these. The bottom line, though, is what's that do as far as cost? So we're looking at cost here of the cover crop and the herbicides, or in the case of the far left there, is kind of the traditional system in Tennessee, where we're almost always doing 2 burn downs. Typically, some kind of dicamba, verdict, Roundup PowerMax early burn down, and right behind the planter, because you can't afford for any pigweed to be up, we're primarily using Boundary and Gramoxone. Then coming back in Extend beans with XtendiMax, Warrant Ultra, and Roundup. And then because I did show you that grass and some Morning Glories, we came back with Select and First Rate. But we needed another application. Where we used cereal rye, we had considerably less expense, even counting in the cereal rye seed cost. And the seed cost I've got are high. I can tell you that for a fact. I think you all can do better, particularly if you're growing them on your own farm. The cereal rye vetch was the highest. One thing, well, I think we're using like 15 pounds of vetch, and that's way too high, I think. But I was trying to get, yeah. I don't think, I could probably cut that down by about $20, easy, by being about 6, yeah. Wheat did pretty well, but my pick of the litter, and I showed that, is wheat and clover. Again, you pull wheat out of the bin, cheaper yet, but that's about half the cost of my system without a no-till, with the same yield, and 1 application of a herbicide across it. So potential issues, you all probably been going through these for days now, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but some planting concerns. We had a lot of, I think maybe we weren't the only ones, but we had a lot of slug issues this past year, hiding underneath that heavy cover crop. It's probably one of the biggest problems we've got to try and overcome. We had several fields, more than several, replanted, big fields, because of slugs this year in this no-till. Seed soil contact is a real issue, particularly for my cotton, because you plant it shallow. It's hard to get the needle thread on getting the proper depth and getting it up. Insect issues. When you're planting green like we are, insect issues like Scott Stewart, our entomologist, has never seen before. Pea weevils ate me up this last year. I didn't even know what they were. I called him in, and he informed me. And we had an insecticide seed treatment, which probably helped fend them off. Otherwise, I think they would have ate it to the ground. So that's not the only cutworms. What's that? 3-corner alfalfa hoppers. A lot of things you're going to see when you're planting green that you're not when you're traditional burn down program. So you got to watch for them. You almost got to plan on an insecticide in there. And pigweeds, they're very effective on these cover crops. Not so much some other weeds. And I think you'll see a shift over time to maybe some things like grasses and morning glories. Things to keep in mind, it really helps on trying to take out mare's tail in our part of the world. And it almost always, where we've used it now, it cuts down at least one in-season herbicide application and often one burn-down application. Very, very effective in the new technologies. Liberty Link, Extend, Enlist. It isn't a silver bullet, the cover crops, but blended together, they do work really well on pigweed, not so much for some of the other crops. So I think that's, I may be fast, I may be long, I don't know. What do you do about slugs? That's a good question. What do you do about slugs? And I don't know if anybody has a great answer. One is to keep the road clear because they hide underneath that debris, and you can somewhat, and they'll stay away from it. But that really doesn't work well in our part of the world, because if you use really aggressive road cleaners, with the topography in Tennessee, everyone is a gully. All your seed's down at the bottom of the ditch. That isn't the real good answer for slugs. I don't really have a good answer. It's something we really need to come up with.
I'm going to have Sarah come up here right now, and then I'm going to grab the mic back here. But while I introduce Sarah, maybe, Sarah, if you don't mind, just give a quick introduction of where your kind of area you're working, and let us know, too, maybe some of the issues that you're seeing with weed control, you know, whether they're application problems, some of the common things that you're seeing in your area and how you're trying to address those.
Thanks, Daryl. As Daryl said, my name's Sarah Jahan. I'm the technical support representative for Kentucky and Tennessee. We've got some age on us now, Larry. I've got 29 years going back to Ciba-Geigy, I guess. So how many of you guys have used atrazine on your farm? Anybody tell me how old atrazine is? It's not as old. Well, it's older than us.
It is. It's older than us, that's for sure.
It's 60 years old this year. And Syngenta invented atrazine going back, and we sell as much of it today as we did the first 5 years it was launched. And the reason that is because atrazine has always been a part of a herbicide program. It hasn't been the herbicide program. So getting to Daryl's question, if I could get guys to do just a singular thing, is think back to whenever we relied on a single mode of action. And we can say glyphosate, we could say lightning, we can say a number of chemistries that if we rely on them solely, and I think it's where the dicambas fall in, they are very short-lived. And I was in meetings, and it would go back to, I guess, Ciba and Novartis back in the 90s, and we were saying, boy, glyphosate resistance is going to happen. And other manufacturers say, oh, you'll never see it. Anybody remember that? You'll never see glyphosate resistance. Well, the reason it came pretty quick is because we relied on it. We could control 4-inch giant ragweed, right?
4 inch. That's 4 inches.
Right. All right. Now, when Larry's 4 inches is like this.
It is.
So if I guess to Daryl's question, if I could just get you to use residuals, get you to use residuals both in the pre and in the post, take advantage of these technologies that he's talking about, or I guess over here, but incorporate them into a good residual program. That, to me, is the biggest advantage, whether you're a cotton grower, soybean grower, corn grower. Keep these chemistries active by using multiple modes of action with residual.
Got a question right here.
Yes, I have a question for Larry. I heard it said yesterday in a roundtable discussion that our insecticide seed treatments are causing the increase in slug damage. Have you studied that, or are you contemplating studying that in the future to see, and will it work in western Kentucky and northwest Tennessee, not using the seed treatment?
So, yeah, question was, is there any interaction between these seed treatments, insecticide seed treatments, and slugs? That's totally news to me. I don't know of anybody looking at that. Slugs aren't insects, so I don't. The predators? Okay.
There's only 12 universities that have come out and said the neonics kill the ground beetles which eat the slugs. We have a number of growers who have dropped the neonics. They have having no problems at all with slugs.
Okay.
Yeah, the data. I caught the tail end of that presentation. I mean, all the universities listed there, I haven't dealt with directly. I know the University of Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, the Mid-South, all the Mississippi, Carolina. The benefits of the neonicotinoids as far as control of not just foliar insects, but also soil insects, has been well documented. I do think I'm going to look into your statement, sir, about the beetles to see how effective they are in controlling slugs. But like anything, generally you need multiple points of control in order to control something that severe. So when you have that much of a heavy cover crop, I don't think it's probably eliminating seed treatments. The benefits that we see as far as insect and disease control, I would be hard-pressed in a no-till situation to agree that the elimination would be a good thing. But I think we do need to find out a little more about that data that was cited yesterday and see how effective those beetles are on controlling slugs. Because it's certainly an issue that we need to manage in no-till cover crops.
Got a question back here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that atrazine came out in 57 or 58. In 1958, southeast central Illinois had 0 foxtail. In 59, it was a real problem everywhere. It's real interesting that Ciba-Geigy came up with that answer. What's a good new weed worth to a chemical company?
We've been accused of spreading weeds, you know, when we scout our fields with our growers. What we do know is that weed shifts happen. Okay, if we think about it, I started in '89, and you think the weeds that we faced in my area, Indiana's state weed was giant ragweed. And then you looked at the shift that we saw to mare's tail. So whatever weeds you're controlling the best are the ones that get selected out of the population, and you see a population shift. But I do think, you guys, when we use singular modes of action, you see weed shifts and you change up what you end up fighting every 4 or 5 years. So that's an interesting observation.
Some of you guys aren't playing very nice this morning, but
No, I didn't expect that. I've been disappointed.
I don't think they wouldn't mind you coming up and asking them anytime during the event, but I'm going to throw the mic over here, so.
On those terminations where you did them 2 weeks post of spraying, was there any crimping and rolling involved with that?
So good question. Question was on did we do any crimping and rolling with that? So we have done some, and we've done with and without. And I can get a little better seed-soil contact if I do it with a roller crimper. And for soybeans, that roller crimper can really work because of the timing. I struggle with a roller crimper on that blend if I'm planting corn in a typical time in Tennessee because it's March. It's early April. And I run a roller crimper, and I come back a day later, and it's all back up. You got to get closer to either the wheat or the cereal rye getting into that dough stage for that roller crimper to be really, really effective.
You mentioned the use of cereal rye, and also you talked about wheat. Did you notice any difference in the weed suppression between wheat or cereal rye as your cover?
Good question. Yes. Typically, we get better weed suppression with cereal rye over wheat. That's probably not a surprise to a lot of y'all. It's pretty well documented that cereal rye will give you better weed suppression. But for the dollar, a lot of my growers got wheat in the bin. It's a lot more economical to use wheat. It's not that far different in the weed control we've gotten.
Trying to make my way to another one over here. Throw your hand up again, right there. Okay. I'm not moving as quick as Phil Donahue did.
So we've been big cereal rye users on our farm ahead of soybeans, and we've never had an issue so far with getting our residuals to work. So maybe I shouldn't be concerned, but that's always a worry of mine going into the spring. So are you concerned at all in a big biomass of cover crops getting your residuals to work? Will it take more rainwater? Exactly how do you go about managing that?
Yeah, that's a real good question. And it is a concern because it does, even the better herbicides do not work as well in a cover as they do if you're just spraying the ground or burned down area. So yeah, it is a concern. And you're not going to get as consistent you know, most trees are a little bit inconsistent anyway, depending on how much rain they need. But in a cover crop, they're even a little bit more inconsistent. Even saying that, though, time and again, if I use a residual in a cover, I get better weed control to the point, like I just showed, we're spraying it one time and we're good to go. It's a lot better than not using one.
Way in the back of the room.
How soon will the dicamba drift from onto amaranth in adjoining fields, where there's just a light amount? How quickly will those develop resistance?
Well, I was hoping to avoid the D word altogether. So that's all I do is the D word. So light rates of dicamba drift, it may kind of help promote it, but really where we see this resistance develop is when we're using, and all we're pretty much using is one herbicide to control one weed over big acres. It's a remote plant that's going to have resistance to dicamba order around. It's rare. But there's nothing rare on 80 million acres of soybeans. You're going to find them. And if that's all we do is spray dicamba and hit it again with dicamba, we're going to find them real quick. I mean, just way too quick. And we need the shelf life of these new technologies to last us a while, because I don't know of anything new coming, folks, other than pulling by hand, or that's why I'm working on cover crops. That may be all we have if we don't take care of these better than what we have in the past.
Okay, back here in the center.
Larry, have you been, you mentioned a lot of how important it is to have different modes of action and a total system approach. Have you looked at different varieties of like cereal rye as having different effects? And then my follow-up to that is, are you also looking at other cultural practices as a part of the system, like narrowing up your soybean spacing and of course crop rotation as a overall strategy?
Yeah, really good point. Because you can't managing, especially Palmer pigweed. Part of the answer you can pour out of a jug, and part of it, I'm convinced now, you can't. Cover crops is one. Narrowing the row width, which is what most farmers now in Tennessee are doing anyway, it makes a big difference. A huge difference when you can shade the ground with the crop and with the cover crop. So that's really important too. Narrow rows and getting a good stand out there. Not having any holes makes a big point in that. So yeah, you've got to mesh the cultural with the herbicide.
All right, up close to the front.
When we're spraying burn down through these extremely high biomass crops, are you recommending 15, 20 gallons of water? I've heard some guys 25. They're seeing problem with the fall on the chemical and getting it where it needs to be.
Good point. And that's another good thing. And a lot of y'all are clearly veterans here running no-till. So, in cover crops. So yeah, you need at least very minimum 15 gallons. If you get some of this really, we have a mild winter like we had last year and these cover crops are really big, you probably need 20 or better. The other thing is the dicamba nozzles, don't use them on those covers. You need coverage. You need coverage on those. By all means, when you start spraying in crop again, use them. We can't afford any more drift. If y'all want the Extend technology here in 2019, we cannot be drifting all over. But trying to burn down these big covers, particularly with a contact herbicide, Gramoxone in particular, but Liberty too, you need better coverage than you do with those TTI tips.
Sarah and Larry, how much do you see some of the control issues sometimes, maybe with the water you're using or what you're mixing with, or, have you seen issues with that at all?
I have. Oftentimes, if we could just get a guy to use, as Larry said, 15 is a minimum, but a lot of the labels are included, say 10. And if you just think of the surface area in an acre being 43,560 square feet, and we talk about, hopefully we're spraying these 4-inch weeds Larry's talking about, but think of the surface area we've got to cover, guys. So understand you do less acres with more water, but the benefits of getting a good kill. One of my concerns is in a burn down on your soybeans. If you're planting before you know if your burn down has been effective, that's a big risk, Because if you have palmer in that burn down or mare's tail in that burn down and it's not dead, there's limited options post. So really got to make sure those burn downs work, and carrier volume's a big issue.
Back to the slug issue. Did you notice any more or less slugs when you sprayed like after planting than compared before planting?
So question was just, did we see any more slugs after or before? And just in Tennessee this year, slugs were so bad, wasn't even a no-till. If you had a really good corn crop the previous year and you had a lot of fodder on the ground, they were bad in that. We had some replant just on corn residue from the previous year. So it's going to depend on the year. But my sense is, because I answer your question, no, I haven't seen a difference. But my sense is if you're planting and then terminating, you're probably going to have a little chance to have a little more slug problem than you would otherwise, just because the ground shade it more. They like shade.
I just have a question about residual herbicides. Does the residual herbicides, can I say, wear out quicker further south? We're basically 100 miles north of here, and there's not too many residuals we can use and still plant covers the next year or that fall.
Absolutely. Most residual herbicides are broken down by microbial degradation. And those microbes in the soils that metabolize the active ingredients, they're active at, say, 54, 55 degrees and warmer. So as you move north, you make your applications, and that cold temperatures come in much earlier. And so the percentage of breakdown through the summer after application is a much shorter period of time as you move north. So your chance of carryover would be greater as you move north. So absolutely, your residuals would be shorter further north. And the benefit of a shorter residual is you're not concerned as much about carryover. It's one reason we came out with broad axe north of I-80, is because we didn't want carryover to sugar beets and different things like that. But down here, we need our residual to last as long as possible, so higher rates and chemistries with longer half-lives, like Dual, like the authorities, do a better job down here because of that. Larry?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. We just don't get the long residual. We did some studies, and we can spray a lot of different things, at Scepter, Pursuit even, and I don't have any trouble getting cover crop established. Yeah.
Okay. Way in the back.
In Nevada, we're having issues with Escort and Roundup, and we've noticed something. It depends. I'm not hearing anything about surfactant, and we used to use no foam A, B, and Elevate, and Loveland had us use something called Weather Guard with Roundup, and it was the best kill I've ever had. I don't know if, I'm sure that's had some kind of effect upon it, but as I said, I've not heard anything, people talking about surfactant here.
The use of surfactants for some herbicide performance is critical for them to work. I mean, you could name the brand, whether it's Callisto, whatever, the ALS chemistries, the surfactants, very important, glyphosate being one. Really with glyphosate, and because this group comes from such a wide geography, your water conditioners, the water qualities and how hard those waters are in different areas, really do a really good job to add a water conditioner. I covered southern Indiana as an example, and you could spray in Greensburg, Indiana, which is southeast of Indianapolis. If you sprayed glyphosate without a weather guard or a water conditioning type product, you had very poor performance because the waters were so hard. It kind of depends where you are in water quality, but if your product requires an adjuvant, by all means add it in. If you're using something, say like an accent or something, an ALS, if you leave a surfactant out, your performance will drop to 30 or 40%. You add a surfactant, it's well above 90. So pay attention to those labels and what's required, because a quality adjuvant does make a big difference.
Okay, final question.
So speaking to adjuvants, has your company done any research on humic or fulvic acid as one of the adjuvants for different herbicides?
Did you say folic acid?
Fulvic or
Folic
humic acid.
We do a lot of our surfactant work is purely based on not only just coverage, which is kind of a no-brainer, but also what you can do at the leaf surface in regards to pH. So whenever you talk about your water conditioners or some of these hybrid surfactants that we use, lowering that pH at the leaf surface can really increase performance. So much of our work is that way. Our challenge, though, is that there's a lot of adjuvants out there, you guys. That everybody with a bathtub and a spoon can come up and create an adjuvant. And one challenge you have, I don't mean to insult anybody, but if you have a high-quality adjuvant with an individual that can show you some data, at a minimum show you a label, because as a tech rep, I'm sent, hey, can I use this adjuvant? And I go up on Google and I can't even tell what's in it or how much. I am hard-pressed to say, yeah, throw it in with Halix. So I would just not challenge you, but encourage you, find a good adjuvant, make sure it's got a label so you know what's in it. Call your Syngenta rep and say, is this actually something that's going to improve coverage and uptake?
All right, thank you. Now I know why my wife had me remodel the bathroom and took all the tubs out. She didn't tell me why she didn't like the fact I was doing that. So, well, thank you again to Larry and Sarah for leading our discussion this morning, and thanks again to Syngenta for breakfast.